Hello, welcome to the usual place with friendly but not a usual character on set today. Welcome, Ranga.
Thanks, George.
Good to have you on the other side of the camera.
No, it's good to be on the set. I just want to experience it. It's always different from being on the other side.
No, I mean, tell the truth. You can't find Rufaro.
Okay.
You want AWOL.
Yes. Look, I had to fill in for Rufaro. He's out and about on business. We thought he would connect online, but I think he got busy.
It being a Friday afternoon.
Of course. So, yeah, I'm glad to be here.
He might just realize it's absolutely hard work.
Yes.
It's not as easy as you think.
Yeah, look, it's not. It's not. But yeah, it's not. It's also not easy to be on the other side and backing instructions. And you guys sometimes misbehave. So I'm glad to be saved. I don't have to be.
Well, we'll see how you're going to keep the time today on the other side of the camera. What are you drinking?
Orange juice. So there's this juice that I like. I don't like Mazoe Orange Crush. But there's another variety on the market called Fruited. I think it's manufactured by some guys in Bedbridge. I like it because it doesn't have some after taste, and I think the acid levels are much better. So yeah, I was glad one of my colleagues in the office actually saw it on the shelf over the weekend, and they were so kind enough to buy it for me because then I really love it.
So you've tested the pH levels of Mazoe?
No, not necessarily the pH level, but the taste. You know, there's that sharpness that comes with Mazoe. I think that's the signature kind of thing in Mazoe.
Acidity.
Yeah, but I don't like it. I struggle with it.
I actually can't believe we've dedicated this much time to
that. Look, it just tells you we are dominating today, so might as well go on and on.
Absolutely. Exactly. Riveting discussion.
Exactly.
Riveting.
And what are you having?
So, one of our viewers said that we should try this. So this is a Deribot, Foucault, Maiheu, and you're telling me that this is their fast-selling drink?
Okay, you're not quoting me on air.
Wow. That's what you say.
Ranga is the equity analyst.
We're fact-checking.
Ranga is the equity analyst. He's probably better positioned to confirm that. But I believe they're now more of a beverage company than they are a milk company.
Okay. Well, I'm
and
going to try
the
this.
top seller is the Maheu. Is that right?
And generally, Maheu as a product on the market, notwithstanding who is producing it, is actually quite it's a popular drink. It's food and drink.
Well, I'm used to the homemade one. I've actually never bought
the store.
There's quite.
So this will be my first time actually.
There's quite a whole range of these ones. Some are flavored.
Rufaro, please come back.
There's some strawberry varieties. I mean banana and etc.
Right.
But this looks like it's the original.
Yeah. So I'm gonna actually try it.
My kids love it.
Oh, really?
Interestingly, and they prefer the plain one.
Okay. All right.
So tell us how it goes.
Okay. We don't care what you're drinking.
Yeah, I can skip
those.
Well, I am having a Sinsol rosé from Kumusha, Tinashe Nyamudoka, the Zimbabwean sommelier in South Africa. He makes this. Okay. I've never tasted it, so I'm quite looking forward to it.
Okay.
I was going to spend a bit of time explaining to people how a rosé is made, but I think you guys have taken up all the time available to talk about drinks today. So we'll move on to matters that we don't know much about. So really, you shouldn't take us too seriously. We're just having a drink. I really want to talk about the wine, though. I'm sure I'll find a moment somewhere in the next hour to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're just having a drink and trying to make sense of the world. We've got Ranga among us today, who probably knows a little bit more than us, but shouldn't be taken too seriously.
Yeah, the smell is good. I love the texture, the color, and everything.
It's creamy.
Yeah, it is.
It looks like a super. I don't like the smell.
And you prefer that?
Yes. Anyway, so this week we've had a lot of talk on the national debt. In fact, we've had a conference. We've had the CEO or the president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Adesina.
Adesina, yeah.
in the country. He's volunteered to help us talk to our creditors. Our situation is so bad.
He was approached.
He
didn't volunteer. He was approached by the president.
He agreed to help us talk to our creditors. Our situation is so bad. One of the people we owe money is now helping us negotiate with the other people that we owe money. I don't even understand how that works. But anyway, he's been around helping us.
Well, to provide a bit of color, he was actually in Zimbabwe at Surplus Trust at some point in 1999 to 2002. So he's very familiar with the terrain.
But we still owe him money.
Yeah. He's a brother. Let's call it that.
And we've also had our national best man, Mr. Chisano, stepping in as well to assist us in talking to the people that we owe.
Whose mother is called Dambuz.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, these are the little anecdotes that you read and just provide color to these conversations. That these are friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, Mozambique is a fair weather friend if you consider how much Zesa debt they've written off. Sorry, I beg your pardon. All weather friend. How much Zesa debt they've written off over the years. They are friends. So, we've been trying to engage the people we owe money and trying to get them to see things our way and give us some more money. But I think, before we even delve into some of the nitty-gritties of what's been said and how things are looking, why is this an important discussion? So we owe them and they're not giving us any more money, so let's just leave it. Why is it important for us to be engaging with them?
Well, for a number of reasons, and I think we can break them down. Creditors, the nature of credit in credit systems is they must be paid, because if one, it's from a behavioral issue right across the world, because a lot of these multilateral institutions actually lend to a number of countries. So if one defaults and gets away with it, you can imagine what would happen if everybody thinks that they too can get away with it. So I think from a premise of just generally good governance, good credit systems, they work on, if you owe someone money, you must pay back. So I think
but what happens if you don't?
This is what I'm saying, is you set a very bad precedent.
Yeah, but we don't care.
And, you start affecting, for example, African countries, because then the premium that African countries must now pay, other African countries must now pay for them to access debt becomes higher, because now they imagine that, Botswana could one day just default on its debt.
We still don't care.
Yeah, you don't care, but that's why creditors care.
Okay.
So why are we discussing this is because on top of creditors' agenda, this is one that Zimbabwe must pay its debt, because the entire credit system is incumbent upon people paying their debt. If you don't, if we were to get away with it, then
others would try.
You set a very bad moral hazard and very bad precedent where others will try. And even if they do try and they succeed, what just happens is for any new debt, it then comes with a higher premium.
And eventually all debt disappears.
That's the problem. So from a creditor's perspective, that's why we're having this discussion.
And from our point of view,
from our perspective, a number of reasons. The principal one being we always want to access credit in the international markets. And right now, it's extremely punitive, the sort of debt that we're picking up. Afrexim Bank, we saw the numbers, we're paying an interest rate of 12%. So if you put it in numbers, if your economic growth is not anywhere near 12%, it means that you're actually taking from your savings. You're taking from the economy to actually pay your creditors. So, and if we were with the usual multilateral institutions, we'll be paying 1-2%. Maybe now it's increased to about 4% because of higher interest rates, but that's the most. And then if we were to float a bond, for example, and be credit rated, we would probably, Rwanda is getting money at 5-6%. Those are the interest rates that Kenya gets. Namibia is a very good case where it's rated BBB and they pick up debt in the international markets at anywhere between 3-4%. So you can see the difference between 3-4% and 12%.
So if we borrow 100 million, we are paying 12 million in interest.
Yes.
And while Namibia pays
3 million.
So Namibia has 9 million more.
They can do a whole lot more. Then the third reason is the insurance market is pretty much predicated and dependent on the World Bank and the multilateral institutions providing the guarantees and insurance when private investors eventually come into the country. If you look at the FDI that's actually coming into Zim compared to our friends in Mozambique, the most we've ever received is 750 million in the last 20 years. And if you look at what's happening with Mozambique on average is getting 4-5 billion.
Well, in fairness, they've got oil.
We do have oil.
Wow.
But anyway, we've got resources. We can. We are a much bigger economy than Mozambique. And with the right principles, we would get a lot of investors. So you find that the sort of capital we're getting is Buccaneer capital. A lot of your standard Chinese investors, if they want to come to Zim, they need their loans or their investments somewhat covered from an insurance perspective. And to get that insurance perspective, usually is the multilateral, so country risk insurance, which we almost everyone is exposed. But previously it used to be the World Bank. Elsewhere, the World Bank actually provides an insurance.
They provide the
Yeah, and
they do. You can get a meager insurance policy for this country.
Okay, meager.
But when the World Bank is insurance to an investor, they ask the Minister of Finance to sign
guarantee. Okay, all right.
So I guess I'll chime in and say, so it's affecting central government's capacity to borrow, but it's also affecting private businesses because the cost of funds to the central government tends to be the benchmark for you maybe when you want to borrow, unless maybe you are a big global organization that maybe is borrowing on the back of the good name of your parent company. So if we are borrowing at, if the government can borrow at 12%, it seems like that's the starting point if any private player is to go out there. Fair enough, there could be some that are probably borrowing at a much slightly cheaper cost than 12% because of their own goodwill. But it would help the entire economy if we could access international capital markets at rates where everyone is. Because, I mean, just look at it even at a personal level, So you don't have a good credit score with the bank, so you can't access any funding from the bank. And your only form of borrowing is to go to loan sharks or to these other...
Are you calling Afrexim? Anyway, carry on.
Wow. So it's not helpful. But I'm not sure how sincere we are in terms of us being able to resolve these issues.
Well, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
But I mean...
to his point, the idea of the sovereign debt becomes the benchmark debt.
Yes.
So everybody else has to borrow
at a premium
to the sovereign debt.
Because
so, and that's why even US dollar interest rates all in Zim is 17% to 20%.
Because there's a principle, I thought, you being the corporate finance expert here was going to talk about a principle called a risk-free rate.
Exactly.
It's presumed that the best borrower in a market is the government.
Yes.
And the rate that government borrows at is called the risk-free rate. And everybody else borrows at a margin or at a premium
above the risk-free rate.
Above the risk-free
Not so
rate.
sure about risk-free.
Well,
but ideally...
But it's once your government is not perceived to be risk-free,
then everybody else.
Because the government...
No, you're right.
Is supposed to be the biggest economic player in the market.
And it's a very interesting thing that I don't know if you guys discussed it last week. When
So you don't watch the show?
Okay, fine. So when those government announcement about the loans that government got from private players recently, it just tells you that maybe private players actually have got a better credit score. They can actually access international capital markets better than government, to a point where they can borrow and then on lend to the state. But obviously, it's the limiting factor is they will not have enough scale. Because obviously, as government, you've got big infrastructure projects. Maybe you want to borrow in the magnitude of $1 billion or so. But I mean, if you've got a scenario where the one who should be borrowing at risk-free is not accessing the market. They actually have to go to a private player.
But you're actually saying something more than you're actually saying. I don't know if you've picked this up. So
I haven't.
okay, so we're saying
Maybe it's in the mail.
but that's a very poignant point that you're making there, because what he's saying is, if internationally we know that government is borrowing at 12%, and yet the same government is borrowing from the private sector at 5%. How is it possible that a private sector in Zimbabwe can lend government at 5%, knowing the same government could borrow from Afrexim Bank but at 12%? How is it possible?
You're the corporate finance expert.
Look, I think it's
Is it in the margin?
yeah, it could be in the margins, but it could also be.
I don't want to get you into trouble.
Yes. Anyway, I think let's leave it.
Okay, so we'll leave it there.
Let's leave it
Okay,
there.
it was a rhetorical question.
But okay, let's have some facts and figures. How much is the national debt? I mean, is it a problem?
Yeah, it is a problem.
How much is it?
So depending on who you ask, the number.
So maybe I've got the figures here, and the international put some color. So according to the numbers, I think the ADB president gave us some numbers. So total debt is 17.5 billion, and international debt of that 14.05 is international debt, and then about 3.4 billion is domestic debt. And then I think very interesting categorization when you look at it. So of that international debt, what's owed to bilateral creditors is 5.75, and then multilateral is 2.5. And I think the multilateral, that's where you have your IMF, World Bank, and the others, right? And I think Tinashe have already highlighted that these are critical in terms of.
Okay, wait. You should go back to the other side of the camera. So 17 billion, 14 point something.
17.5.
I'm sorry. Let's be pedantic about it. 14 point something is international. 3 point something is domestic. Do you agree with the number?
No, because these numbers are being provided by the Treasury. These are Treasury numbers, but nobody has actually done a full-on assessment of our debt. So you have debt that government has actually guaranteed, and as we know, that is still should. So a lot of the Chinese debt. So for example, Wangi, the airport, is that included?
We don't know.
That's what I mean. So nobody has done an independent study of actually what our debt is. I would take this view that this is the minimum. Remember, we've got a good president, which is Zambia, right? Where they first of all come out and say, you know what, our debt is 14 billion, but once a review and an audit was done, it turns out it was actually 25. Part of it is around the penalties, right? And part of it is some of government guarantees that could have.
I mean, you said government guarantees. I would broaden it to bookkeeping issues, right? So, GMB has been making losses for the last 3 or 4 years. We don't know about before that, but for the last 3 or 4 years, we know because of command, because we know they buy maize at one price and they sell it at a lower price. Has a check been written to GMB for the difference? Probably not.
Inflation.
Maybe it's inflation, but maybe there's a whole host of GMB suppliers out there who are sitting waiting for the
US dollars. Yeah, true.
Has that been correctly accounted for?
Not entirely. Sometimes it hasn't. We've got a good case of Zisco, right? Which at some point government then decided, okay, we are actually gonna deal with Zisco. And the thing that they did is they actually took over Zisco debt, which was $500 million. But before they took over, that number didn't appear on these numbers.
And what happened in the process of taking over is people started showing up saying,
oh, by the way,
you owe me.
there's also contingent liabilities that we haven't talked about. So if you look at the case of insurance, not insurance, of our pensioners that have actually lost money.
Oh yes.
So it's a
Justice,
contingent
what is his name?
Mafosiri.
The guy who did the inquiry into the pension funds. He actually said that.
No.
He was a white guy. He said that I think 47% of the losses of the 5 billion lost by pensioners, he attributed it to government. So there's
exactly.
There's
a
a
contingent
47% or whatever that percent that he said it was of the pensioners have potentially a claim on government for that number. So I mean, I guess what you're saying is we don't know.
And now Mafusira has come up with a judgment that potentially
creates a new liability.
A new liability. So those are
the Mafusira judgment. For
okay.
those who might not be familiar, it's the last week or a couple of weeks ago judgment on the conversion from US dollars to Zim dollars and the losses. So you've got that, but then also on the other
so the
side,
minimum would be 17.5.
But
so
on
this
the,
is
on
more
the,
like on balance sheet debt.
yes.
Then there is
No, that we've just accounted for.
This is what
Because
the
they
government
still
accounted
own
that
balances.
element.
But when we're really serious, a lot of these creditors will now come.
okay.
What he's saying is actually important because you've got, for example, Command Agriculture. Some people have not been paid. Some have gone through legacy debt, to be fair, but there are some whose cases are still ongoing, right? And a lot of those have not been accounted for. Wange, for example, I will be quite keen to understand how it's accounted for.
But okay, so that's one side where the debt is potentially overstated, right? It's potentially understated. But there's another side, in my view, which is where the debt is potentially overstated, right? So simply because the government says it owes someone, does it mean we do? Did we receive value? Was it fair? So legally and morally, do we have that debt? So let's take all the amounts that...
I think the only odious debt that we picked up was the Rhodesian debt in 1980. That was about 700 million.
No, you got all these other suppliers that George was upset with, that they were charging $9,000 for laptops.
It's perfectly legal, but he's a lawyer.
No, but that's why I say legally and morally.
Well, let's not use words like morally, but
Why not?
legally. Please go ahead.
I think I would just look at it from a simplistic point of view. So if Tinashe owes someone and then you step in and say, no, I'm taking over their debt, surely you become liable to pay. Notwithstanding, because, notwithstanding the fact that whichever way that debt may have come about. So and I think the problem is once we have mentioned the issue that there are some contingent liabilities, guarantees and all, which maybe whenever the creditors feel like they are not getting much joy from the original borrower, they put them under pressure to get government to come on board. And that then just it's actually a worrying factor because it shows you that this debt number could actually keep on increasing. The same way that, Arab business just wakes up one day and say, okay, fine, all blocked funds, all whatever could not be paid, we've assumed that as debt. And you want to ask yourself, okay, do you know how much we have out there that potentially can be assumed by government?
And you can't have a cut-off date.
Yes.
Because legally, if you owe somebody...
there's prescription, but within those contexts. But still, you guys, I don't know if you guys are getting my point, right? So in those numbers, we may well have a debt to a contractor who says they built a dam. Is there a dam? Was the dam built in terms of the...
I think
So do we owe him that money?
Okay, so you're going down a rabbit hole, and I don't know why you'd be keen on this rabbit hole, because actually the problem will be more on government than it will be on the contractor.
Yes.
So if the contractor says Mbudzi is 88 million and government signed, whether they actually deliver a product that's actually worth 88 million, it's besides the point.
I think
even if you do an audit.
I think you're missing my point. Yes, there's value for money and there's fraud.
Yes.
And so what would happen if this was a company, right? If a company was at this point, it used to be called a judicial manager, it's now called a something practitioner. There's a new name for them in the law.
Okay.
He puts an advert in the newspaper, he calls a meeting. Everybody who thinks they're owed money by the company must bring their papers and prove their claim. So you say you supplied a car. But our contract said you're supposed to supply a car with 4 wheels, blah, 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 blah. This car has 3 wheels. Your claim is not valid.
I think
Has that been
this,
done?
well, I think for this 17.5, I'm fairly confident. It's the new debt that perhaps that hasn't been done. But for this old debt, because it's been with us for a very long time, I'm sure that we can sort of authenticate. But you are right that yes, we still need to do that as a secondary step. But I don't think that's the major problem.
And it doesn't
Although we still need to do it. But
and I don't think it will take away the liability. Maybe it's good just for information purposes. And so if you then establish that this fraudulent liability came from these institutions, now you know how to deal with them going forwards. And maybe you say in future, this is what I will do. I think what they basically did with the invoices, for the short-term commitments or liabilities, I think it's important. Like even at corporate levels, you want to see, okay, fine, we are paying for this. Where are the invoices? Even say we want to see 3 invoices. Was it approved properly and things like that? It's always very difficult to do it in retrospect. But maybe it's a lesson that we need to just carry on to the next.
Right, let's
level.
move on.
So,
Neither of you guys is ever going to be my finance director. By the way.
yeah, no, good reason. The most strategic. The most strategic.
Exactly.
But could I highlight one other important point why this is important?
Yes.
Is that going forward now, if government actually wants to get new debt, so even if they decide, you know what, we're not going to pay any of this, but they actually just want maybe 200 million, it's just very difficult to get that 200 million.
And I think that's a very, I think that's the most important point you've made, right? So
even if it's at 35%, if somebody's willing to give us money at 35%, still
just when whoever wants to give you money at whatever price goes to their other people, their committees, and says, "Oh, I want to give Zimbabwe money," they're going to be told, "But don't you know those guys?
They owe us money.
They don't pay debt,
And they don't pay debt.
even if you don't owe that particular institution.
When you need guarantees,
Those
it's
guys don't
impossible.
pay debt. It's
So you start getting debt from individuals. So imagine a government getting debt from an individual.
but even that, even your likelihood of getting it from individuals diminishes, because once you've got a record of not paying debts, let's bring it down to our individual levels, right? So you come to me and you say, "Oh, Ranga called me. He wants to borrow $50 for the weekend. He says he's going to pay me on Monday." And I say,
Really?
"Really? You owed me $70 from last weekend. And did you know his car is about to be taken by the bank and he hasn't been paying his rent?" What's going to be your attitude towards lending him?
Obviously not.
Or you're going to lend him on very onerous terms.
Extremely
Probably
honest.
you could also just jump in and start attaching whatever assets of his that you can get.
Yeah, well,
Because now
we're a
one-
country, you can't do that.
No, you
Well,
can't.
no, you can't.
It's Zimbabwe. Remember what happened with this?
Oh, yeah, you can take a few planes
in
to
South
embassies.
Africa, even in
But-
South Africa,
you
that
can take-
property
you
in
can
Cape
take
Town.
embassies, but most of our assets you can't take. But what it just does is you stop getting loans.
And beyond government, even private sector. If private sector actually wants to raise money, it also becomes very difficult.
Yes, and remember, in that debt is legacy debt, right? So you're trying to get credit. You're making this horrible stuff, and you want to get some raw materials from South Africa. And you ask your supplier to give you 90 days credit. One of the directors of your supplier is a director of another company that has money stuck in legacy debt. And says, "You know what, no matter how good Ranga is as a borrower in Zimbabwe, that country just changes the rules." In fact, on another board I sit on, we've been given these things that they call TBs and we can't sell them to anyone.
Absolutely. So it's a serious issue.
So we've got to solve it.
It is a serious issue.
And so now we call this conference, right? So we get everybody together. We get Mr. Chisano, we get Dr. Adesina, and they put everybody in a room. Let's talk about this problem. How do we solve it? What actually happened in practice was Mr. Chisano and Dr. Adesina spent a few days before the conference. The conference was for ribbon cutting and taking pictures. The work was actually done prior. So Dr. Adesina, in his speech, interestingly, Mr. Chisano in his speech says a lot of flowery words, but I took some notes here. But if you look at the substance of his speech, he says stuff like, there is a perception in some cases that the government does not honor agreements. This is Mr. Chisano,
Our best man.
our best man, and our president is in a sofa behind him at the top table. He says there is a perception in some cases that the government does not honor agreements and commitments made, as well as implement decisions taken. In this regard, it was underscored that for development partners, issues such as the guarantee of property rights and investment protection agreements are critical, as well as the ability to repatriate profits and macroeconomic stability. Few investments will come to Zimbabwe if these conditions are not met.
So
The stakeholders recognize that lack of dialogue is a major stumbling block, which must be addressed, and the dialogue requires trust between the government of Zimbabwe and its development partners. Has he been watching the show?
I'm
suspect so.
I'm just imagining George, you're a banker, a former banker. Then you get this kind of report on a borrower or of your bank. So Mr. So has got these tendencies of not paying, of being aggressive to the creditors. And
And it's coming from the friend.
yes.
Well, okay,
The best man.
no. In fairness,
It's coming from your
this
best
is
man.
not a report to the bank. This is after
It's
the
a public.
after our friend, our best man, has met the people we owe money. Then he calls a meeting for us and the people we owe money.
Okay.
He's saying to us,
Oh, this is what is coming from the people.
yeah,
you
because
owe.
remember what I said, he spent the last 3 days meeting all these people. Now he calls a big meeting to take photos. But in the meeting where photos are being taken, he says,
Shamanwenya, I don't know, it's a
can you, and this is what your creditors are saying. So, yes, go on.
Okay, so I just wanted to provide a bit of color because you're quite right. We should take this quite seriously, and what Chisano is saying quite seriously. That I actually think that the problem is now with the new debt holders, the Chinese, for example, because you know what, the World Bank has been here for a very long time. They sort of understand how these guys behave, but you've got new creditors. And this is actually coming from new creditors. We're saying, you know what, we bent backwards. No one was willing to.
Yes. But
We bent backwards, but look at what's happening. So a very good classic case is the Development Bank of South Africa, right? Who gave us 10-year money for the Plumtree Road.
But before that, they gave us money for that juice that he doesn't like. And then we took the farm. when we still, before we even finished, before the equipment had been fully installed, that they paid for, we took it.
Wow.
You know, and these are our friends.
Our big brother.
Yeah, our big brother. The Chinese are some of our friends.
Oh, we're the friends.
Oh, we're the friends. So they're saying, you know what's actually the problem? And they see the issues that we are continuously raising as also issues that they face. Because if you think about it, when they signed the dotted lines on Wange Power Station, it was a dollar economy.
And the minister and the president at the time were making statements in public. The words, the Zim dollar is dead. Those 5 words were spoken several times by 2 very high-ranking officials.
$1.2 billion. And now they're about to hand it over.
We're like, hey, I will give you bonds.
By the way,
I mean, come on, we'll give you bonds. You go on auction, everything will be fine. Anyway, so that's Mr. Chisano. Dr. Adesina, he made a very interesting speech. Among other things, he says, so as I get older, I start looking not only at the words that have been spoken, but I look at the context and we try and read between the lines. So he speaks a lot. Then he gets to a place in the middle of his speech where he then addresses us. Okay. He says, Your Excellency, Mr. President. This is halfway through his speech. So clearly he's changed his focus. So the first half of his speech, he's telling the lenders that they're very bad people and sanctions and the economy's not doing well. And NRZ now has 20% of its capacity, etc., etc. Okay. Halfway through, he turns around and says, okay, now, you guys, my friends, there is only one agenda: reforms for lasting change. You guys have to change. I'm here to help you, but you guys have to change.
You know what's very interesting? Just to give a lot more color, and I'm glad that you're reading in between the lines, because actually that's what I did. And let's actually contextualize it even further. In 1999, when Adesina was in Zimbabwe, he would have been telling his government, Nigeria, that actually, guys, what I'm seeing here, this is, the infrastructure is fantastic, the financial services is robust, and that's why I'm studying here, because actually this is our go-to model, right? And now, 23 years later, 24 years later, they've gone through this path, where in Ghana, in Nigeria, they then had Sani Abacha, put it out. Then you then had Obasanjo, and then the 2006, 2007, where 70% of their debt was forgiven, and there was debt restructuring. They went through HIPIC, and the economy boomed to such an extent that it's now the largest economy in Africa. So this is somebody who's coming back.
They're also not paying their dets, but anyway.
I mean, they still have problems, right? But they have problems at a much bigger economy than they were 23 years later, 23 years ago. To even give you serious context, is we had one of our entrepreneurs, Strive Masio, actually going to Nigeria to give them a cell phone, mobile telephony, which wasn't there. And this was a Zimbabwean. That just it contextualizes just how big and robust Zimbabwe was at that particular point in time. And then now he's come back.
Now they're entrepreneur.
Exactly.
What's his name? Dangote comes and looks around and
he says, you know what, I can't. Nigeria is like one of the most corrupt countries. And this guy, Dangote, operates in the most corrupt country in the world. Or one of. He comes to Zimbabwe, he's like, no.
I can't deal with this.
I can't deal with this. But I think going back to what Adesina is saying, guys, the fights you had in 2000, you're still having them. The world, Africa has moved on. I can't be sitting and pontificating about Africa and that Africa is changing, and somebody in the audience, in the international audience, will always pick Zimbabwe and say, but you say all these things, but Zimbabwe hasn't met its BIPA agreements. Zimbabwe hasn't, there are a number of things that Zimbabwe hasn't done.
We're going to come to that.
And the core issue, which is what you've picked up, it's reform.
Yeah, he actually breaks into poetry at the end. But in the beginning of his poem at the end is, the past is behind us. We must move forward and focus on implementation.
I like the part, I thought you'd pick it out, where you're saying we've got one agenda, and they actually singled out one issue that has been very topical in Zim, that it's not about regime change.
Yes. Okay. So then he says it's not about regime. Yeah, that's actually the same thing. He says there is no agenda on regime change. There is only one agenda: reforms for lasting change.
And I thought that was very important, that coming from our friends, because we've been very, very suspicious of everyone. And I don't think it was coincidental that this conference, they had to pick President Chisano and Adesina as a facilitator and chairperson of these discussions. Because I suspect if it had been driven by the creditors themselves, anyone else, it could have been,
I mean, this is that embarrassing. This is that embarrassing moment, right?
Yes.
Where you've been fighting with everyone, and then you choose the mediator, and then the mediator says, "But you weren't doing it."
Yes.
Anyway, so
and not only that, I'm going to invite your best man.
Yeah.
Maybe he can speak your language.
I mean, you can sort of imagine if Bob was still around, they would have had Kaunda at the table, or something like that.
But to give them some credit is, I think I would say there is a shift in terms of maybe attitude. They may not be able to follow through in terms of the expectations of getting this issue resolved. But for the president and his ministers to be sitting there and allowing their friends to be frank to them to that
Like,
extent.
when
what exactly were they going to do?
When were you born?
Because they're going to give them a script or something.
Have you forgotten what happened in 2016?
But anyway, no.
We made the exact same hullabaloo.
But what's interesting, let's go with what Ranga is saying, right? So Dr. Adesina then goes on and he outlines a 3-point strategy. And maybe the crew can put this up as well on the screen, because if you were listening or if you went over it quickly, you thought it was his plan. It's not. He says this is a plan he's got from us. It's our government. That is.
Do you remember in 2020 when Mtuli wrote to the IMF?
Yes.
That's exactly what he said.
Yes. But let's talk about what's on that plan, right? And is there anything wrong with it? There's 3 things. What I find interesting is there's 3 things. Governance reforms, economic reforms, and number 3, interestingly, is a point on white farmers. That is on a par with the other first 2 points on governance and economy. If you then further dissect this, and you count the number of points, there's 12 sub-points. 8 of the sub-points, in my view, are political.
Governance.
They fall under governance, and they have to do with the white farmers. Okay. And only 4
I think
are economic.
I would love to talk about the white farmers. I wouldn't say white farmers, while it is true that it's governance, but while white farmers, and I think you would agree, it has to do with the law. Because remember, you're not paying the white farmers for the land. You're paying the white farmers for improvements.
Yeah, but there could be under number 2 with all the other people we owe money.
No, it's actually because you signed BIPA agreements, and so you've broken your own laws and international laws.
With 1,000 other contracts that are under number 2.
No, the other, we didn't actually break any law. We just didn't pay.
No, we went to Parliament and got all these multilateral loans approved in Parliament. And whatever, these acts. We made it law that we now owe the World Bank this money.
No, you actually signed an agreement with the World Bank, right? And you then didn't pay, which is quite different from the white farmers. Because from white farmers, there was a contract and you breached the terms of that particular contract. So that's why that one,
So
I
there's
would put
a
it under
difference
law.
between the word agreement and contract.
No, I think you're not quite getting it.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, okay, so let me simplify it. I'm saying with the World Bank, you went into an agreement, and the only fault is you just defaulted, right? You just did, it's a creditor-debtor relationship. With the white farmers, it's beyond creditor-debtor relationship.
We signed a global compensation agreement.
Well, that's why we're going through that process. But for us to even finish that process, it's us actually agreeing that there are cases, international cases, around BIPA. So the World Bank hasn't sued the government of Zimbabwe. But some German farmer, Austrian farmer, sued the government of Zimbabwe and won. Some Dutch farmers sued the government of Zimbabwe and won. So that's why it's separate. And people need to understand that. It's only separate, but it actually has the largest claim, better than all the other claims, because the German and the Dutch...
Because they've got judgments.
Yes, exactly.
They've got judgments.
And also maybe the other way of looking at it, in my view, why I think they had to put these ones next to each other is, okay, maybe one would say you have not been able to service your debts maybe because of capacity issues, right? But wait a minute, you actually have got a history of not respecting property rights. And just imagine how difficult it is for you even to attempt debt forgiveness conversations. When part of your docket is saying, but this guy just
doesn't even respect.
Yes.
No, but
so I
but
think
but okay, I understand where you guys
Yes,
are from, and
yes.
I think, but you guys are looking at it from the outside in. To me, from the inside out, the white farmers issue is a political issue because
It's not. It's a legal issue.
No, it's my view. Can I finish my view?
Okay.
And then you can respond to my view.
Alright.
Because to us internally, we made a political decision. It's not like we didn't know what we were doing. We knew what we were doing, and we made a political decision that we won't pay for this land. These guys can go wherever they want. We're not going to pay them.
And what did we also agree? Legally.
Then later we said, okay, we're going to pay you.
No, we're not paying for the land.
Yes.
but we're going to
We
pay for
actually say we're
improvements.
taking the land, but we will pay for the improvements. We said it.
And we've always said we'll pay for the improvements.
Yes, but we've never
Yeah,
But
That's why it's a
we-
legal issue. It's not a political issue.
Yes.
Okay, so the political issue is the land. And the white farmers have said, okay, fair and fine, don't pay for the land.
okay.
But when I left, I had my gym equipment, I had my tractor. Kondozi, you know what happened with Kondozi? You know, a lot of these farmers had, in fact, capital expenditure would have been more than the actual land.
Okay, but
Right,
we're,
they had
we're,
buildings.
we're going down a rabbit hole here. The
No, it's
point-
actually not a rabbit hole, but it's a point of
the
order.
point I was making. I think that my hair might be slightly fermented. How old is it? I need to find the expiry date on this. Yeah, I think it's actually expired. So the point is, so we do this list for ourselves. And why? I mean, and I'll come back to these things being political for us. The question is, do we have the political will to address this? Because if we are not going to address it, so we've now committed, right? So we've called our friend, he's called our creditors, he said to them, this is the plan, right? There are 3 main areas. We're going to form thematic working groups with trackable milestones. So I presume that thematic working groups have some people from government and some people from the creditors. The creditors want to see progress. But on our list, we've said freedom of speech, human rights, alignment of laws with the new constitution, implementation of the Montlante Commission recommendations and compensation, progress on Zidera issues. Are we going to be able to deliver on this? Is this a way to debt resolution?
Maybe before you comment on delivery, I think I would say I like the honest in this, like acknowledging, because now it's pretty much an aggregation of the views that are coming from all the creditors, that you guys have got these problems. And I think if you step back maybe 5 years ago, it was going to be very difficult for government to make this kind of acknowledgement, especially on
So
the
you haven't even read the Lima agreement?
to say this way, a priority governance reforms, like within government.
Well, his question is there political willingness? But they were always there. It's not like they...
But this way, they're coming from externals, that this is what we expected.
It was always asking...
Has there been an acknowledgement internally that we needed to deal with this?
In August 2020,
Uh-huh.
the Minister of Finance and Economic Development wrote to the IMF upon completion of the SMP program and said, guys, I need your help. And the reason why I need your help is because I can't access capital.
Okay.
And I can't access capital, but this is, if you give me some sort of bridging finance and you open up your lines of credit, I am willing, as the government of Zimbabwe, to do
deal with
this.
Okay.
That's why he keeps on saying that Adesina didn't pick this up from his own head.
But are we going to deliver on this, right? On the economic reform.
Your question on political willingness, unfortunately, George, for whatever reason, the Zimbabwean context has been infected by this idea that you can't reform yourself out of power, right? Okay, so suppose that was just a thought, but nobody has actually ever provided a counterfactual idea around that thought. That, okay, you're saying that, but let's look at history. What we know is anyone who's actually maintained power are people who've actually
constantly
reformed.
reinvented themselves.
They've constantly reformed. From Magna Carta, if you look at what happened in France, it's because they couldn't reform. What the British do?
Louis that guy.
The 14th.
Louis XIV,
Yeah, he had to go, right? But in England, the only reason why the elite are still, even up to today, still have a house of their own,
and they're still the wealthiest.
they're still the wealthiest, is primarily because they continuously reform. So this idea
If you look
can't
at the
reform
Chinese
yourself,
Communist Party
it's because they continuously reform.
and the Russian, what's it called? The Russian Communist Party.
Yeah.
Well,
Even
Putin's party.
Tanzania, even in Mozambique,
Pinduzi.
it's the same thing. The people that maintain power are people who continuously reform. But unfortunately, our environment has somewhat been infected by this idea that you can't reform yourself out of power. We're actually...
So you deal with the issues on number one. That's your response to issues on number one. But the issues on number two, exchange rate reform, quasi-physical activities, parastatal reforms. So I mean, let's talk about it. Exchange rate reforms means auction is gone. We all get foreign currency at the same price.
And we don't have these experiments called gold coins and other things.
Yes. Getting rid of quasi-fiscal activities means
Subsidies,
Reserve Bank,
debt.
that whole building, they shrink to 2 floors, and then they have people fixing cell phones, sewing dresses on the other floors because their job is much, much smaller.
Basically, they just have to transfer those guys to the Ministry of Finance.
No,
but because
we have a Minister of Finance.
but the fact that they were performing fiscal activities or past fiscal activities.
The reason they were doing it is because there was no money.
It's tongue in cheek.
No, basically, there's no money.
It's quasi-fiscal.
Then it must be fiscal.
It's fiscal.
Yes, but there's no money at the fiscus, right? So we say thank you very much, all of you guys. Please take your desk and your chair and your computer. And
no, George, come on, let's give it a moment. I say, everybody at 80 Samora Michelle, what you guys were doing, you
must move down the road.
No, you were always doing what Treasury was doing.
Exactly.
So please go down the road.
Yes,
and then let's have a monetary
team. And so that whole
for
building,
once.
That whole building is going to be empty.
Yeah.
Are we going to do that? Parastatal reforms means the GMB must stop making losses. The GMB can't buy maize unless it has money in the bank. It can't buy wheat unless it has money in the bank. It means Zupco can't be charging people less than it costs to print a ticket. If Zupco wants to run buses, they must charge people the correct amount and pay for the fuel and so on. And then we've committed to an IMF staff monitored program again. This means after we've written all these things, we say to IMF, please send us some youngsters who sit in the minister's office and every day remind the minister to do this and tick and send emails to Washington. That's where the head office is.
Yeah.
And tell on you in Washington that you're not listening to them.
And Adesina actually says you can't have SADA. Quite like that.
Without water.
Without water.
Well, I mean, you're trying to say to the lenders, give us some incentives.
Some breathing space and.
But can we deliver on this?
Looking at number 2, it doesn't look like this is a difficult task to do actually. And I'm actually surprised by the fact that when Minister Mtuli came, I think one of his first announcement, he was speaking to most of these issues, especially the issue of the parastatal reforms and all the fact that he was going to privatize quite a number of them. But surprise, they have actually started nationalizing certain private.
Exactly. So he came and he said this, and then he found it easier to go to Blue Air and give free chickens.
Yeah.
So can we deliver on this?
I think it's possible. It's not too difficult.
Well, the question is the political willingness. Is it there?
Are we going to all of a sudden say, okay, guys, next season, the next agriculture season, farmers pay the proper price for electricity, and they must sell their wheat to whoever wants to buy it at the market price. GMB is not going to subsidize farmers. Are we going to do that?
So I think right now what's going to make it very, very difficult for them to wiggle out of some of these things is the fact that we have involved our friends. These are like the demands that are coming, yes, from the creditors, but they're being communicated to us through our friends. Let me finish.
How many times have you sat with Rufaro and his family members?
but you see, the issue, George, is so if we sit in some discussion and we are discussing some stuff about you, and we are there, and we are your friends, right? So if this one fails, if this window fails, is there any hope for you?
Well, okay, Ranga, maybe let me give you context of what happened in 2016, May 2016, the Lima arrangement. The Lima arrangement was underwritten by the African Development Bank, where the African Development Bank said, guys, if you pay the World Bank debt, and at that time, it was about 2 billion. So between World Bank and the African Development Bank, it was about 2 billion. If you find someone, which they helped us to find that someone, who could pay the $2 billion, then we are in play. Then Paris Club arrangement comes to fore, and the World Bank would release more money. That was the arrangement. It was actually a much stronger arrangement than today.
Okay.
And what we
We don't have an arrangement yet today.
Yeah, wow. Then what we're trying to come up with, that actually Lima was very strong, very tight. Everybody had agreed this is what we're going to do, and what was just left was just
Number one.
Well, no. The first thing that was going to happen was to transfer money,
We had to send 2 billion.
so that we just cleared our debt and we just opened our lines of credit without having to go through number one, right? Then the second was again going to be number one, the governance issue, because we had just had a new constitution. So then the idea was in 2018 when we have elections, these were going to be our first post constitution elections that would be free and fair, that would have all those tenets that we are talking about. Then 2017 happened, and everybody actually thought it was a good idea. It was a good thing. It's like, whoa! Remember the things that we were talking about a year ago? Well, now they are happening. So everybody was excited. Everybody gave this government a second chance and said, okay, all those reforms are actually going to happen. And we had an SMP, the IMF actually came, right?
But they didn't give us money. They just said,
Well, they cannot give us money.
they sent a bunch of youngsters to stay in our hotels and
At the moment, they cannot give us money. An anecdote. There's one tutor of mine.
he's
You know, it's an anecdote because it's nothing to do with this. But he sits at the IMF, and we had a very good chat then about what was actually happening behind closed doors. But anyway, the other thing that I wanted to highlight, I've lost my train of thought. Okay, I'm just chronologically giving that we've been given enough time. We've been given enough chances. And what has happened subsequently to 2016 is we've actually doubled our debt. So what we owed in 2016, we've doubled it. Albeit there's the farmer debt, which was not accounted for in 2016, so that one you can just take it away. But even if we take that away, we've doubled what we owe. And why we doubled what we owe? Because somebody actually took a bet on us. Afreximbank said, you know what, this is a new dispensation.
not only Africans.
But they
Trade
went,
creditors. There's a whole 4 billion of trade creditors that sent stuff to Zim
Okay.
and believed that in 30 days' time they would get money from this country.
and
And to
they
this
didn't.
day, they're holding.
So this is
TVs.
coming, if you want to really contextualize this is coming in a space where somebody is actually saying, you know what, do you remember what we did in Lima? You guys didn't do this. So this is my question to Adesina and Chisano directly. Why do you guys think that this time around the leopard has changed its sport? Why do you think this time around there's political willingness? Because
Well, I think we should be more positive than that. Rather than asking Adesina and Chisano why they think so, I think we should be encouraging the government. Ranga is very positive. He thinks these are easy things to do. You think that these things won't reform the government out of power, but actually help the government to retain power. So let's encourage them. We've got an election coming up. Win an election, you've got 5 years. You've got a long window to get these things done. They're fairly simple. There's only 12 points in total. Let's get to work on them. If we don't get to work on them, what's the alternative? Do we go back to the Chinese? Do we go to the Russians? What's the alternative?
And I think to respond to Tinashe directly, like, why do you think the leopard will change its spots? It's because of all those things that Adesina has actually pointed out at the opening of his speech, that we have actually suffered. The economy has actually suffered. So he's spoken about NRZ and how its capacity has actually shrunk. And every macroeconomic problem that we are facing right now, it's actually linked to this thing. So, for example, when you look at the governance reforms and economic reforms that are being highlighted here, not only will they help us get some positive reaction from our creditors, but they would actually solve some of the problems that we've actually faced. For example, when you look at the exchange rate reform and all, I think another portion of that debt now is coming from the what do they call it, the blocked funds, because we had a very unsustainable exchange rate system in place. So imagine you have dealt away with all these things, it means even you give the economy some breathing room. So actually, there's more to be gained. And it takes away a lot of pressure from the politicians having to deal with all these things. You know, you want to be a borrower at good standing. You can't continue this system where you have to, a whole government will have to borrow from some individual. What does it say about?
So it's not that I disagree with you. I actually agree with you.
So
and I think, but you're not speaking to the politicians. You're speaking to business. You're not speaking to politicians. Speak to politicians. Why should I do this?
I think George has made a very good pitch that look, it's beneficial to them. They should do that. In fact, it will help them retain power.
Yes, I agree. But you're speaking to people who've already been infected with this disease.
Okay, no more my own.
That you can't reform yourself out of power. And the other thing, I'm just being realistic. So it's not that I'm being pessimistic. I'm being realistic. Did corruption increase or decrease in the last 10 years?
Of course, it has increased. What are you saying?
So it means that the political class, actually, their bellies are much bigger. They can exist outside of the economic system, outside of the political system. They can be a pariah for a very long time. Look at Cuba. Look at North Korea. I'm saying this not because I'm being pessimistic, but I'm just saying that while it is true that we're in that position where we can change and we must change, it's actually good for them. But where they are, it's like Ian Smith, right? Unless they're forced to do it, they're just not going to do it.
But nobody's going to force them to do it. So we've got to appeal to them. And we've got to appeal to their self-interest. And I like the way you framed it, Tinashe, that doing this helps them stay in power.
Absolutely. But that's to somebody
who's interested in power.
Of course they are.
Okay, so imagine all your entire life, you've been fed one thing.
Yes, but what we're trying to do now is feed them something else.
Other. So it's going to take time. And that's why we're having this conversation.
Yes.
It's actually going to take time. And that's what we need to spend more time on. And I think, and we're not even the right people to do this, because I think political scientists need to actually come out with a theory and really, pontificate on this idea that actually to maintain power, to have a good legacy, because now you're speaking directly to a political animal, is that if you want to protect your legacy, if you want to protect the livelihood, so that in 200 years or 300 years, people look back and say, oh, those were our golden years. For you to do so, actually you need to reform. That's the story of our history. It's continuous reform. So why would the political power not want to reform? We can see what's happening to South Africa and the ANC. Is that what you want? And if the ANC doesn't reform,
the ANC, the South Africa wants to be asked. No, but look, I think we've laid out the issues, and from what I'm picking up, it's important that we re-engage with the international community. Debt is important if we want to grow. We can't grow without foreign debt, and we're not going to get foreign debt unless we re-engage. And we've laid out a good plan on re-engagement. I think those that are around the president and the Minister of Finance need to give those two gentlemen some leeway to act on this.
Can I say
because that's what's going to.
If you just allow me just one thing. Because I actually want to.
Are you taking advantage of the fact that Ranga is on this side of the camera?
No. I actually want to promote your point. Because I think it's something we have to appeal to the politicians. That so far, is it not beautiful that it's Chisano who's coming here trying to help us, a former president? Is it not beautiful that Motlatle comes to Zimbabwe and says, you know what, guys, we're a friend of Zimbabwe, and it's a former president. There's something beautiful about these former presidents whose lives have continued post-presidency and who are seen as elderly statesmen and who are interested in Africa and the Pan-African dream. We can't be a sore thumb or a sore spot in the rest of Southern Africa or Africa.
No, we've always had goodwill, and we've always had former presidents. We had Jimmy Carter come here in the 70s.
He was Western.
Yes, but we've had the goodwill.
The regime change agenda.
Yeah.
But I think what's important is a couple of things. Is that our friends are saying we must do this. Our own leaders are putting forward this plan. And this is the second finance minister who's putting it forward. And I'd like to think that Chinamasa wouldn't have put it forward without Mugabe's approval. I mean, he didn't go to Lima on a frolic of his own. So you've got two finance ministers and two presidents saying this is the way to go. I think it's up to those around them to give them the leeway. If you put them in a straitjacket, they can't get this done. And if they don't get this done, it'll be another 20 years. Let's get it done.
It's not good for their legacy. It's not good for their kids. It's not good for everybody.
Let's get it done on our terms. And it's still on our terms. As you say, it's our friends that are mediating.
And by the way, if you actually accomplish this, sanctions go away.
That's the data for you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it goes away.
So, anyway, before you actually start wearing your favorite color shirt, let's end the show because we'll get into trouble. But it's been lovely having you along. I think today was a bit passionate on our part, but it's because it's been made clear to us that what needs to be done is so simple. And we can, I guess we feel a bit like Moses in the Bible, right? We've been on the mountain and we can see Canaan. We see Canaan in Mozambique.
Possible.
We see Canaan in Zambia. We see Canaan in Nigeria.
Ghana, Egypt.
We see what can be. But unfortunately, we're not Joshua, nor are we Moses. It's those that have chosen to take up political leadership that are the Joshua or the Moses that can or could not take us into the promised land. You didn't know that I know the Bible. Eh?
Yeah,
He was a youth leader.
I'm imagining the youth leader and you doing. I'm quite impressed.
But to your point, what we're saying is maybe even us, let us see ourselves as a Moses. We're not going to go to the promised land, but we can surely create the bedrock in which the future generations would look at us as the patriarch.
And Judge, before you close, just a minute.
This is good to have from.
Yeah.
So you understand, it's not easy to close the
it's
show.
not easy. So just as a suggestion, because I find this 3-part central pin strategy very interesting. So maybe you could get some very artistic young person to do a chart for us as some sort of a checklist. And on the show will be, whenever we feel that, or maybe there's evidence that A of number 1, for example, freedom of speech, the metrics are saying this has been achieved. We tick, and then we see how much progress we'll make.
Yeah, let's create a dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. And then
Somehow, I'm not sure I should be agreeing with you guys. I'm sticking to my wine over here.
Exactly. I mean, this is what they've set for themselves. It's not like we are giving them. This is their template.
And
So
we
it could just
measure
help them
against
by
it.
just making sure that we remind them that, remember, there's this
Thing you say.
Okay, now we're ending the show. It's been lovely having you along. As usual, you really shouldn't take us too seriously. We don't know what we're talking about. We're just 3 guys in a bar, just trying to imagine what a better Zimbabwe could be like. But if you do have access to people that make policy, please raise some of these issues with them and see if we can make this a better Zimbabwe. Have a lovely weekend. Stay safe. Be good. If you can't be good at it.